All right, let's jump right into this one. Today, we're going to deconstruct a really unique and frankly complex worldview that's been pieced together from a series of online articles. We're going to map out the system it calls the containment grid, and we're going to do it using its own very specific language and logic. And it all kicks off with this incredible quote. It's basically asking us to stop thinking in human time and start thinking in geological time. And that lens, well, it's a powerful one. It suggests the very ground beneath our feet has this deep, almost mythic history. This idea, it's the foundation for everything that's about to follow.
So let's start right there with this cosmic foundation. The first big idea we have to wrap our heads around is seeing our world as land that was once sea, a landscape that actually remembers its own deep, watery past. Now, what's so cool about this is how it totally reframes our planet's history. I mean, forget the maps you know. 3.2 billion years ago, Earth might have been a complete water world. And even as recently as the Mesozoic era, the age of dinosaurs, huge chunks of the continents, including North America, were totally submerged. The land we live on right now, in the grand scheme of things, is basically a newcomer, just pushed up from the depths.
And to really hammer this point home, look at this number, 80%. Think about that. While dinosaurs were roaming, the vast majority of the continental crust was underwater. Now, this isn't just a fun fact. For the worldview we're digging into, it's a fundamental truth about the very nature of terrain itself. So how does all this ancient history show up today? Well, the source argues it creates what it calls terrain glyphs. It's this fascinating idea that a volcanic island like Hawaii, or a mountain range born from an uplifted seabed, they're like symbols. They're physical reminders of the incredible geological forces that made them. In a way, they're memory that's been made solid.
Okay, so now we pivot. Big time. We go from that deep, natural, geological history to a human-made system that's been built right on top of it. An overlay it calls simply the containment grid. So what exactly is this grid? According to these texts, it's the entire Western system. But it's not just the government you see, not just the flags and buildings. It's a much deeper network of finance, law, and bureaucracy, all designed to manage and, contain. It's a powerful and very specific claim. And here's the thing you've got to understand, how this grid is actually structured. The source breaks it down into 5 core nodes. Yeah, you've got the ones you'd expect, like financial systems and legal frameworks, but it also points to these less obvious forces, like bureaucratic saturation, just the sheer weight of all the permits and audits, and something it calls land containment logic, which, as you'll see, is a really key theme. And just like the terrain has its glyphs, so does the grid. This is where the language gets really specific and interesting. Uncle Sam isn't just a mascot, he's a recruiter glyph. The IRS isn't just a tax agency, it's an audit ring. Zoning boards become gatekeepers, you see? This framework relabels all these familiar institutions to describe their true function inside this containment system. Okay, so we have this massive impersonal grid, which brings us to the human cost. What happens when a person, what the source calls a mythic individual, starts operating with a logic that the grid just can't understand? And to really get what's driving the individual in our story, you have to understand this term, sovereign continuity. Look, this isn't about profit or stock prices. It's about seeing land as an ancestral legacy, a deep personal connection that goes way beyond anything a bank statement could ever show. And this is where it all becomes a story. The articles really focus on this one character, an uncle who bought timber-linked land bonds. But here's the thing. He didn't see them as financial assets, not at all. To him, they were ancestral glyphs, almost spiritual markers on the land. He was operating on that deep geological level we talked about at the very beginning. And this quote, wow, it gets right to the core of the whole argument. The uncle's downfall, as they see it, wasn't a simple financial failure. Nope. Instead, the system saw his actions as these mythic signals it couldn't compute. And because it couldn't decode his motivations, its only response was to just collapse his entire endeavor. He was, in their words, ritually erased. This whole process is called the death spiral, and it's laid out like a sequence. First, it begins with symbolic ownership. You have a stake in the land, but you don't have true access or control. Then the pressure comes from an audit ring, that bureaucratic targeting. And finally, boom, a systemic collapse. It's presented as this predictable, almost mechanical process. So this all sounds huge and abstract, right? A cosmic grid, ritual erasure. How does any of this actually show up in our day-to-day lives? Well, the source offers a simple, really tangible example it calls the terrain betrayal.
This comparison just lays it all out, plain and simple. On one hand, the terrain itself makes a promise of natural abundance, right? A world where food just grows freely. But then the system imposes its own logic, encrypting that abundance behind gates and fences and turning basic nutrition into just another commodity you have to buy. And the source gives a specific diagnostic from a place in Hawaii. The observation is simple. Why are there no fruit trees in public spaces? The analysis is that this is containment logic in action. Abundance is intentionally kept behind fences, which has a real-world impact on people's nutrition and their budgets. This is what it calls the terrain discrepancy, that gap between what the land could offer and what the system allows.
Okay, so let's pull back for a second. After all of this, what's the big takeaway? The ultimate point of this whole worldview, with its very unique language, is to give people the tools to decode these containment glyphs for themselves.
Now, this part is absolutely crucial. The source itself claims it is not a political project. In its own disclaimers, it describes its content as mythic infrastructure, which it defines as a set of tools, diagnostics, and broadcasts, not some kind of manifesto for action or a simple critique.
So, at the end of the day, the stated mission is purely diagnostic. It aims to expose what it calls ritualized containment, to identify how different actors in the system work together, and to diagnose systemic erosion. It's really adamant that these are just tools for understanding, not political endorsements. It's a framework for observation, not a call to action.
And that brings us to the end. The source material leaves us with this final, really provocative question. If you take its entire logic to its conclusion, if the system is truly designed to collapse anything it cannot understand or categorize, then the most important question for any individual becomes, what signals are you sending? A fascinating and definitely challenging thought to end on.